Well, the 2020 Kansas Virtual Wheat Tour has been completed, and we're joined now by Aaron Harries. He is the Vice President of Research and Operations with Kansas Wheat. And Aaron, of course, in the month of May, we normally talk about the Wheat Quality Council Hard Red Winter Wheat Tour. That's usually in the first part of the month. However, we know COVID-19 has changed so many things, and indeed that was the case for this year. But you came up with a different idea, holding the virtual wheat tour here the past 3 days.
Yeah, our board talked to us and said, what can we do if there's not a wheat quality council tour? And we really wanted to do something. It's an opportunity to put the spotlight on the wheat crop and wheat farmers in Kansas for a few days. And so we came up this idea with an online virtual tour. So it's not hundreds of people from around the United States coming in and driving around the state in cars and groups. And for obvious reasons, they couldn't do that this year. But we made use of the resources we had. We've got a great K-State extension system out there, and they were very helpful. The agronomists and agents around the state, some of our farmers and other volunteers, and we put together a tour, stay-at-home tour, I guess would be a good way to call it.
Well, USDA earlier in the month estimated the Kansas wheat crop at 306 million bushels. And as you mentioned, this is different from what we normally see out of the Wheat Quality Council tour. But going through the state, let's just talk about the overall estimate. What did that final estimate end up being?
Our number is 284.4 million. So that comes in under that USDA number, which is a little bit higher than that, 306 million. So 284 million. We feel pretty good about that number. I think our yield came in pretty consistently with what USDA did. Our average per acre yield in the state calculated to 44 and a half bushels per acre. USDA's number was 47, so we're in the same ballpark there, and it really is a credit to farmers. We've seen that average state yield number really go up in the last 5 to 6 years. The difference, I think, is the number of harvested acres. I think that's where we're seeing the difference between the two numbers. And frankly, a lot has changed in the couple of weeks between when USDA was collecting their data and we did ours this week. And as you and I both know, it'll change again between now and harvest time. We'll see a lot of different things happen. So I've said this many times. This was a sampling and a stopping time, kind of a spotlight in time of what the wheat crop, the potential is today. And that's about all it says.
Well, as typical for this time of year, we talk about several things with this. Let's talk about first the positives of what were some of the observations of what was maybe a surprise or definitely a positive. I would think we'd have some good wheat out there in several locations across the state.
We do, and I think the surprise that comes to my mind is, we had several freeze events, a really hard freeze event in April that really affected central into west central Kansas, and there was fear that really was going to devastate the crop. The pleasant surprise in this case is that we know wheat likes cool temperatures and wet conditions in April and May, and that's what we've had. And the wheat crop really recovered nicely from the freeze in those parts of the state. So they're going to have a beautiful crop in south central Kansas. If it doesn't rain too much, I can't believe I just said that, but as long as it doesn't rain too much, we'll have a beautiful crop in south central and central Kansas. The challenge there is disease is coming on fast. Stripe rust is really coming on, so it's going to be a race there between the grain heads filling and the rust getting on the upper leaves, so that's going to be a challenge. Other pleasant surprise, I think there's going to be some good wheat in northwest Kansas. The rain came on in time. Boy, there's some wheat up there that 4 weeks ago just got burnt back completely to the ground by cold temperatures, and the wheat never ceases to amaze me. It sent up new tillers, nice green tillers, so they will have a crop there. On the negative side, it's just not good in west central and southwest Kansas. The drought is really locked in there. It's too late to do anything about that. So it's not going to be a great crop in that part of the state.
What about varieties? Have we seen some of these varieties that look like they may be standouts for this year's harvest?
Well, there are, and I'm not I won't name any specific varieties, but there's so many variables that different varieties are doing well on. You know, some obviously are tolerant to rust, some are drought tolerant, some are a little bit more cold tolerant. And we'll have to sort that out, you know, after we're done with harvest here to see, because this is one of those types of years where the differences in the varieties are really pronounced, you know, outside of yield, what their special characteristics or traits are. So it's going to be an interesting case study. I think we've got to wait till harvest is done, but to go back and see how those different varieties did in the many different situations we had in Kansas.
Well, let's see. We've had the freeze, we've had rain, which, like you said, we can't believe we're talking about. We've had some heat, but we haven't had a lot of heat on this crop as of yet.
You're right, and so what's worse, dry or heat on wheat? And it's actually hot. Hot weather is bad for wheat. So even though we were dry in central Kansas for a long time, the relatively mild temperatures kept that wheat plant going, and then getting the rain helped it out. So, you know, when it comes down to it, the biggest factor in the crop this year ultimately will not be that freeze, it will be the drought. The freeze kind of maybe was amplified a little bit where it was dry conditions, but the wheat plant does an amazing job of recovering from freeze conditions if it has good weather to recover from. Tillers die in a freeze, but then there are always those secondary tillers that can really maximize if they get cool and wet weather.
Aaron, as we wrap this up, you know, you've been through enough tours, I've been through enough tours that it is the old adage, how many times you literally have to kill this crop for it to do that. And it's so amazing how timely rains and the right weather conditions can take a crop that could be on the edge and definitely bring it back.
That's true, and it's always a precarious situation, and I don't like looking at the calendar because we've got probably at least 3 weeks before harvest even thinks about getting started. That's the one thing I didn't mention. I think we're a little bit behind schedule in most parts of the state due to that cooler weather, but that leaves that calendar fairly wide open for severe weather and all the things we don't like to think about, too much rain, hail, that kind of thing. So it's as always, it's just say a little prayer and hope for the best.
Yeah, because it sounds like the next 48 to 72 hours we could be in that pattern of heavy rain and potential severe weather too.
Yeah, and it's really fine, you know, as long as it doesn't rain on the ripe, dry wheat out there in the field. You know, it can handle the water, and as long as it doesn't have wet feet, which we're nowhere close to that yet. But we really, just for the sake of all crops, need to get that rain pushed a little bit further west in the state right now.
Aaron, I want to make sure that being able to put this together, not only you, Justin, and all the staff there at Kansas Wheat, but I'm sure you've had plenty of help to be able to get everything organized and everything worked out to be able to do that this week.
Yeah, a lot of volunteers. We couldn't have done it without them. Again, those extension folks were priceless. Romulo Lolato, who's our wheat extension specialist at K-State, is just great, a trooper. We had our board members, our staff members out there, and it's a lot of miles, but it's a lot of fun. It just wouldn't seem like a good wheat year if we hadn't been able to get out there in the fields and get out and look at those wheat plants and come up with some kind of number. And frankly, if we can get that 284 million bushels, considering where the acres are, I think we'll be pretty happy with that.
And once again, like you mentioned before, I'll mention too, on May 21st, that's the snapshot right now of this wheat crop.
Yep.
Talk to us in a week or two, then it could be a different story.
We will almost certainly have a different story. There's always upside and downside potential, and it's a big state. So just cross a county line and you'll see something different.
All right, Aaron, sounds good. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the time, Greg.
That is Aaron Harries, Vice President of Research and Operations with Kansas Wheat, giving us a recap of the 2020 Kansas Virtual Wheat Tour. You can go on Twitter, just use the hashtag WheatTour20 to see some of the photos and more information about this year's Kansas Virtual Wheat Tour.